Okay.
Well,
All right.
maybe I will tweet something, but
We do have some good amount of people that filtered in. I'm gonna get started with the introduction while you guys are doing that, and then we will get this ball rolling, this conversation.
Great.
So on that note, I just want to thank everyone for joining us, and of course, Mike and Jess specifically. Welcome to everyone who's logging in right now. My name is Courtney. I'm the events coordinator for Grassroots Bookstore in downtown Corvallis, Oregon. And today we have author Jess Phoenix with us for her book Misadventure, My Wild Explorations in Science, Lava, and Life. And she's joined in conversation with a dear friend of the bookstore, Mike McInally. Traveling the globe and discovering the secrets of the earth sounds like a purview for fictitious adventurers like Indiana Jones and Crusoe and Robin Crusoe. But for Jess Phoenix, it's daily reality. As a volcanologist, Phoenix braves sweltering deserts, frigid glaciers to study the Earth's volcanoes. Her boots on the ground approach to geology has taken her everywhere from the peaks of the Peruvian Andes to the wilds of the Grand Tetons. This adventure follows Phoenix on a breakneck journey across the globe as she encounters narcos in Sinaloa, trudges through sewers in Cusco, and cements a place for herself in the male-dominated field of volcanology. Jess Phoenix is a volcanologist, an extreme explorer, and a professional field scientist. She's a fellow in the Explorers Club and Royal Geographical Society, a featured scientist on the Discovery and Science channels, and an invited TEDx speaker. And then we also have Mike McInally with us, who is not only a dear friend of the bookstore and its owners, Jack and Sandy, he is also a well-known figure in the Corvallis community. Mike is a freelance writer, editor, journalist in Corvallis. His career includes stints as the editor of newspapers in Montana and Oregon, including the Corvallis Gazette-Times and the Albany Democrat-Herald, where his duties included covering local arts and writing editorials. You have some fun names in your bio there, Jess.
Yeah, the hazards of working overseas.
Yeah. All right, so the way that this event is going to work is that Jess and Mike are going to be in conversation for the majority of the event, about 35 to 40 minutes. And then at the end, we'll open up for a audience Q&A. So anytime during their conversation, if you have a question for Jess or Mike, you can pop it down into the Q&A chat box, and then we'll use that to run the Q&A at the end. And then I would just like to let you know that the link to buy Misadventure will be added shortly to the regular chat. And we highly encourage you to buy it with us from our bookstore. Not only will you be supporting Jess, but you'll be supporting Grassroots as a small indie bookstore that can bring events like this to you. Okay, and without further ado, I will let Jess and Mike take it away.
And I thought Jess would start us off with a reading from the book that she's prepared. It seems like as good a place as any to start. So it's all yours. And I'm real curious to see.
Oh, you went on mute. Got a little excited, I think. Oh, it did it again. There.
One more time. I'm just curious to see where the reading comes from in the book. So with that, I will mute for real.
Okay.
For the next few minutes.
All right. Well, we all love the technical world of Zoom, so everyone understands at this point. All right. So this is actually from chapter 4 about Kilauea volcano in Hawaii. And I decided to read this bit because this is the first time I got to sample flowing lava. And I know that that is an experience that a lot of people will never get to have. So I definitely want to share it with as many of you as possible. So the only thing you need to know is that I'm out on the lava flow fields with my colleague, Matt. So, and sorry, my dogs are shaking their collars. Let me rectify that before I start. I forgot I have to make them run around naked. Otherwise it makes this tough. Okay, now the dogs are naked, so whatever. All right, into the book. Totally different tone here. Matt gave me a few minutes to marvel at this deadliest of rivers before redirecting us to our task of locating an active flow. Another half mile or so of carefully hiking across the flow field, avoiding the dicey newest flows and checking the handheld GPS units with the most recent flow maps, brought us to the edge of an oozing silver puddle that reminded me of a thicker version of the T-1000 Terminator in its liquid form. I gawked at the active Pahoehoe flow, lava flow, and Matt smiled. He seemed to appreciate my newcomer's enthusiasm. What I saw was something that my limited experience told me had no right to exist. Rock was solid, it was firm, if occasionally brittle. It was dependable. Houses, fortresses, tools, and weapons can be built from it. Rock was static. It changed only slowly, only with great effort or great force. Yet here I was, a few feet from silver rock that was clearly alive in a way that only science or wizardry could explain. While Matt dug the sampling supplies out of his pack, I thought about what it must have been like to grow up in Hawaii before modern science could explain volcanoes. Of course, a goddess would have been a logical explanation for ground that could give birth to itself, sometimes destroying lives in the process. What other than something divine could make the solid earth turn to liquid fire? Nudging me out of my reverie, Matt handed me a full-face balaclava and silver gloves that were made for someone with much larger hands than mine. I donned the balaclava with care, leaving my sunglasses in place. Then I pulled on the gloves and assessed the heat-resistant silver. It matched the lava oozing in the background. Matt passed me a metal coffee can filled halfway with water and a rock hammer that I would use to pull off some of the molten rock. I approached the flow guardedly. My goal was to get close enough to stick the pointed pick end of the hammer into one of the flow's toes. As I drew closer, the heat grew more intense than anything I'd ever felt. The flow I was targeting was in excess of 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, which is nearly 4 times hotter than the highest setting on an oven. It seemed as if nature had hushed itself unbidden, except for my heartbeat, which was jackhammering in my ears. I paused, eyeballing potential targets and not wanting to get closer to that outrageous heat until I knew for certain where I would strike. I set the coffee can down behind me and decided on a nice fat lobe of lava about 6 feet away that was slowly blobbing toward my right foot. Faintly, I heard a tinkle that sounded like tiny pieces of glass being crunched ever so gently. The lava was making an almost musical sound as the new flow rolled over the older ground beneath. Between that and the radiating waves of heat that were hitting me full force, it felt like a dream. I couldn't take the heat much longer, so I clenched my teeth and stepped toward the flow, right arm extended with the hammer pick pointing down. Suddenly, my eyes felt like they were being sandblasted. At Matt's direction, I had kept my sunglasses on, so I tried blinking. The awful feeling remained, and I recognized my eyes were dehydrating. I needed to hurry, or my vision might end up more compromised than it already was, and one errant movement could result in serious burns. I took one last step, shielded my eyes with my gloved left hand enough to deflect some of the searing air, planted my right foot 10 inches from the flow, and stuck the pick into the living silvery glob. Feeling no resistance, I pulled up slowly, straining against the heat to see what was happening on the end of the hammer. The lava followed the hammer's path, some of its sticky bulk attached to the pick, with the rest fighting to stay part of the flow. The taffy from hell stretched vivid and red, the insubstantial silver crust broken by the hammer, the flow's dazzling scarlet insides exposed to the world. I kept pulling and freed a glob, the molten rock tendrils oozing back to the bulk of the flow. I pivoted, shaking the hammer to make the glob release its hold. It fell into the waiting coffee can, and the water inside crackled to life, boiling instantly, thanks to the scorching lava bleb I had dropped. Steam rose from the can as the sample was hyper-quenched, solidifying it and preserving the information contained inside its primordial makeup. As soon as the boiling stopped, I picked up the can and rejoined Matt at a safe distance from the flow front, relieved to be in cooler air and ecstatic about all things lava. I couldn't stop grinning. We packed up the sample and trekked off to map the lava flow that was currently burning an isolated island of green amid this sea of black. So there you go. Sampling lava.
And as fun as it sounds to be in a profession where you're at risk of your eyes dehydrating, I do want to ask about how you got into that field in the first place. But before I do that, something that struck me while you were reading that passage, and this shows up frequently in the book, obviously the descriptions of the things that you see are very vivid, but the book also has really vivid descriptions frequently about how things sound. Now, the passage you just read from dates back to 2008, right? When you were working there on Hawaii. Yeah. How do you remember those details? You talk in the book about the importance of keeping good field notes, but I imagine the field notes don't include how it sounded. Is it the sort of thing you just never forget? But how are you able to access that, after a dozen or so years?
It's an interesting thing because I initially, when I was at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, I kept a blog, and it's still out there on the internet. It's called Volcano Summer, and it was a WordPress blog. So it's still there, and I haven't changed it since I wrote those blogs back in 2008, and I think I did one or two in 2009. And so it was really easy when I was writing the book to say, oh, let me quote a part of my field notes that I wrote at the time. But as far as the sounds and you're right, and like the sounds, the smells, if I was trying to describe it to someone else contemporaneously, obviously I could pull on that. But a lot of it is you really have to sit there and remember what the entire sensation was. And because these experiences that you have out in the field, especially with volcanoes, they're so overwhelming from a sensory perspective that you really have no choice but to basically store that in your body. And so when I'm trying to recall it during the writing process, I would just have to sit by myself. Normally I'd write, in coffee shops when it's not a pandemic. But so I was writing this pre-pandemic, and I'd be in coffee shops or bookstores, libraries. And I would sit there and I'd be the weirdo with headphones on, listening to some ambient techno or something. And then just with my eyes closed, trying to remember what it was like to be out in these very wild places. But because they're outdoors, I think just as humans, we're naturally a little bit more wired to notice things when we're out in the real world. Like we notice the feeling of wind on our skin or the scent of some unusual flower or plant. And same holds true when you're working with lava.
So how did you get to that point in the first place? How did you get to the point where you decided what you really wanted to do was study volcanoes? And if you don't mind, this is a little personal for me, if you could talk about maybe some of the roadblocks you faced as a young woman in science. And the reason it's personal, I have a younger daughter who actually next week defends her dissertation to get a PhD in immunology, and has sort of been at this point. So what was your path like? And were there obstacles that you had to deal with along the way? And what advice would you give to women and people of color who are trying to get a foothold in science?
Well, first off, congratulations to your daughter. That is a huge accomplishment. And clearly we need more immunologists. So yay her. That's awesome. And really for me, I had a couple of things going for me, aside just from the natural privilege that I had of having a good education, being white, living in the US, speaking English. These are all things that I recognize played a huge role in my ability to go along this career path. But I kind of stumbled into it by accident. I was always an athletic person. I played a ton of sports, but I never really was an outdoors person. Just the fact that some of my sports happened to be outdoors was about as close to nature as I really got. I always thought nature and the earth itself was really fascinating, but I didn't realize that there were careers you could have. It never dawned on me. And so it was in college when I first was exposed to geology as a potential career field. And what really made this happen, made volcanology real for me, was I just applied for a summer research position at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory. And Frank Truesdell, my boss there, he accepted me, even knowing that I was early in my grad school journey. And, I think Frank has a very interesting sense of humor. He's incredible. And he was I actually had many men on my career path who held the door open for me, and men of color as well. So they set a really good example for me, and they allowed me into that world. And I know that a lot of people face pretty much the opposite when they're coming from a non-traditional background. But Frank is Puerto Rican and Native Hawaiian and English in his background. And one of my professors, who was also a mentor when I was at Cal State Los Angeles for grad school, Pedro Ramirez, person of color. And so I had these people who, 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, people would have probably been a little bit more hesitant to see them as scientists. And so I think if you've got something in your background that gives you a different perspective, that is what will be your strength as you move on through, a male dominated field or the sciences, for example, especially field science, it's changing. It's becoming more open to people from more diverse backgrounds, but it is an area where there can be a lot of machismo, like, oh, you don't like beer and you don't have a beard, then how can you be a geologist? That's said jokingly, but the professional societies associated with geology are starting to change. And I think we're seeing that across the spectrum of different organizations. Like they're no longer having free beer. It's kind of a bummer for the folks who do like beer at these organizational meetings. But at the same time, I did experience some of the older, more respected gentlemen in these fields, usually white men, having too many drinks and flirting with grad students or undergrads. And, it gives you this icky feeling. So for me, I found people who were willing to see my potential as a scientist and say, instead of going, do you think you can carry this heavy pack? It was, here's what you need to carry. And then they expected me to figure it out or ask for help. And so nowadays, when I talk to younger students, what I tell them is look for people who want to open doors for you, not people who want to do it for you or push you out of the way because you don't know everything or you're not fast enough. But work with people who say, I like teaching younger folks or less experienced folks. I want you to come out here with me. I want to show you this, because those are the people who are committed to opening the doors of wonder and curiosity for all of us. So don't think you have to work with someone just because they're, the best in the field, blah, blah, blah. At some points, you do need to make those decisions. Like, do I go for the big name or do I go for the experience with that individual? And the best piece of advice I ever got about school and academics, which any range, whether you're talking about college or grad school or post-grad, is don't take the class, take the teacher. Because if you can find out from someone else that a teacher has a good reputation, that's what will make the learning stick with you for the rest of your life.
Well, and I know you're trying to do some of that work in terms of reaching out to aspiring scientists, female scientists. It was Operation Blueprint, and I want to talk about that a little bit later. But at the end of the trip that you talk about early on in Death Valley, one of your first experiences in that, you talk about a moment where you pulled out a rock that you didn't recognize, and you went and showed it to your supervisor on that trip, and he looked at it and he said he didn't know either, but he seemed really interested and curious about what it might be. So, and you talk about how that was a key early moment in you and understanding how curiosity and science go together. Did you ever find out what the rock was?
Well, it was a metamorphic rock, which if anybody listening has taken intro geology, there's three main rock types: igneous, which are volcanic and anything associated with volcanoes; sedimentary, which are formed basically via deposition. So like water or wind moving particles of rock into place, and then they cement through pressure and time. And metamorphics are the weird type. They're the third type. And scientists who specialize in studying metamorphics, all of us geologists think they're a little crazy in a good way, because they're very hard to figure out. And so we actually did figure out that this was a schist. And of course, we love our puns in geology. Geology rocks. So we say that one all the time, but schist is one of those things that it's a very good pun word. But in all seriousness, it was a rock that had been deformed through being buried and then basically transformed through pressure, really extreme pressure and temperature over, hundreds of thousands of years until it was exhumed through the process that goes on all the time in the Western US of uplift. We have all these faults, and so they create uplift, and certain things drop down, like Death Valley's basin is dropping down and the mountain range on either side is going upwards. So we're in a really geologically active place in the Western US. And our planet is alive. So even if you don't know what something is, like, that's totally fine. I know so many geologists who, if you see a big, bunch of mess of rock, you just go, yeah, that's leverite. And everyone goes, the students say leverite. And you go, yeah, leverite there. You're like, no, it's a mess. But no, there are people who love unraveling those mysteries. And there's a lot of techniques we can use in the lab to figure out what a rock is. But, just knowing that it's okay not to know something, that is revelatory for a lot of students.
Well, I appreciate that you held off on the geology rocks pun until the very end of the book. So thanks for that. There is kind of a follow-up question about curiosity. Later in the book, you're doing the underwater work just offshore Hawaii, and you're working, you and a microbiologist are working in the monitor on the ship when Jason, the underwater ship that's actually taking pictures, transmits back a photograph of a fish that you have never seen before. And you sort of explode and you go, what is that? You turn to the microbiologist and you say, did you see that? What was that? What do you think that was? And the microbiologist says, it's a stunning response. It's so offhand, it's kind of funny. He says, I don't know. I don't do microfauna. So is it hard, especially as science kind of gets squeezed into these tighter and tighter categories? Is it hard to maintain that sense of curiosity?
I think it's just a really competitive world. We don't get that much funding to do what we do. And it's basically, if something has the potential to kill people, it's more likely to get funded. If you say something long-term, like, here, let's study climate change because, in 50 years, our oceans will be super acidic and we need to know how to save the species now. People go, oh, that's 50 years from now. You've got to go, like, what's happening 5 weeks or 5 days from now for people to really feel, especially lawmakers, to feel an immediate need to fund a project. So we do have to specialize, and over specialization, it can be really hard to resist that, because if you're professor, if you're like a grad student, your professor has funding and it's for a very specific thing, that's what you get to study. And we're not in the era, unfortunately, of like Charles Darwin, where he's like, I'm going to just travel around the world and make notes on everything. And then we'll start to understand species better and, plants and geology and animals. And it's very hard to be a generalist these days. So one of the things that I try to teach the students I work with, both when I've taught formally in the university classroom setting, and then also with my nonprofit that I do work with, is very much like, look in, zoom in, get the really up close perspective, and also go back out and see the bigger picture, and then look at how it all fits together. And I think it's just, if you want to stay curious, you have to do that. You have to make it a habit. So never focus to the point where you can't pull back and get a larger sense of, why does this matter? Because that's what you do to have good, effective science communication. You have to make a regular person on the street care about, oozy lava versus sticky lava. And I can, but again, I've made that a priority. So if you're in any field where what you do isn't easily accessible to the general public, you need to think about how you can explain it in about 30 seconds or less to really show to the average person that your work does matter.
I'm glad you talked about science funding. I wasn't planning to ask about this, but the fact of the matter, as far as I can tell, is that we've underfunded science, and specifically basic research, for years and years and years, through Republican presidents, through Democratic presidents. Do you see any signs it's getting any better, or is it still just a horrible scrabble to find funding for any kind of basic research?
Well, I've been encouraged recently because when Biden took office, he did say that he wanted to prioritize increasing funding for science, because people say, oh, NASA gets so much money. And I'm like, it's a tiny, tiny percent based, versus what we spend on other programs, including the military. So we put a lot of money into things that don't really answer big picture questions. So I liked hearing that, but we need to be doing a lot more. We need to prioritize it, which means we need to really invest in making sure our society is science literate. And, science doesn't really care about belief systems, whether it's political belief systems, religious belief systems, what have you. Science is about eliminating uncertainty. So it's a process and it's not an end goal. It's not, tell people this is the truth and then shove it down their throats. It's saying, hey, we're going to look at this question. We're going to see if our hypothesis, if our thoughts on this are accurate. And then if we get new information, we're going to update our understanding of how the world works. And I think that's a valuable process, even if you're not in science. It's just a good way of interrogating what you understand about the world around you.
Yeah. And I want to talk about the state of science literacy in America, because I've written about that theme in the past. But one of the things that strikes me about scientific research, and I don't know if you have the same take on it, but I sort of wince every time I hear somebody who's in a policy making position or a budget making decision say, we need to fund research that's going to lead to some specific outcome. I think to me that kind of shows they don't understand how science works, that there might be some sort of outcome way down the road, but it gets built on blocks after blocks after blocks of basic research. And if you don't do that basic fundamental research, you never get to the final outcome.
Yeah, it is a process. And it's amazing what you discover along the way. And I totally understand when people have like a rare disease. And, I have several friends dealing with varieties of cancers, including like childhood brain cancer, which is just so awful. And I can see why they are researching very targeted, like individualized gene therapies and things like that for those instances. So I get the draw towards the more specific outcome approach to science, but we are going to be able to do the most good for the most number of people and for our planet if we do fund the very basic fundamental things, like answering questions about black holes and subatomic particles, or really we can't even predict when volcanoes will erupt. That is something we don't have the ability to do. We can tell you when it's more likely to happen, be based on increasing activity, because we do monitor what volcanoes are doing day to day when they potentially threaten human populated areas. But we can't say, oh yeah, next Tuesday at 9, this volcano down the street is going to erupt. We just can't do that. So there are so many fundamental things that people assume that we already know how to do that no, we really, really don't. So the only way we're going to get there is by basically strapping a jetpack onto our science research and saying, go for it.
So why do you think Americans aren't more science literate? And what are the costs that we're paying for that lack of scientific literacy?
This is where my undergrad degree in history sort of comes into play. So it's something that sort of you can trace back pretty distinctly to a shift in attitude. So when Robert Oppenheimer was working on the atomic bomb, the Manhattan Project type stuff, he realized that he was playing with something that would be very, very devastating. It would have devastating consequences, were it to be used. And so he started to speak out about the dangers of nuclear technology. And in return, the US Congress basically said, we're revoking your classified access to this information. And he was blacklisted. So with the blacklisting of Oppenheimer, we're talking, it's like 65, 66 years ago now, scientists said, oh, if I want to keep doing my work, I need to shut up and put my head down and just do my job and not explain the consequences of the work. Just do it, be able to get the funding and just keep on going. And that really did us a disservice, because in countries where science is valued very highly, where scientists are seen and respected for the work that they do, you can tell that the population is a bit more science literate. In America, it was sort of like some politicians went, oh, these scientists could threaten my cash cow, my political donations. So I'm just going to push them to the corner and not really give them a seat at the table. And I think that we can really do a much better job of getting science out into everyday life if we don't just, lift up entertainers and sports heroes. If we actually lift up scientists and engineers and innovators and thinkers and the people who are really making these changes, who are often unsung, I think we'll see kids wanting more and more to go into those fields and respecting them and just asking questions, because we all have a fundamental curiosity. We just have to encourage that and encourage it since right from the beginning. When kids start going into school, curiosity has to be the guiding shining star that we follow.
So how can the general public, do you think, improve their level of science literacy? I mean, what advice would you give to just a community member who's feeling like he or she really doesn't follow science, or it's all about these studies that are hard to follow, and then the next day another study comes along to contradict some parts of the other study, and they decide to turn it off and go to the Discovery Channel, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. What can an average citizen do to increase their level of science literacy?
Well, so we all have these incredible platforms at our fingertips right now. We all have social media access. Whether or not you choose to engage is up to you. But even if you don't have social media accounts, you can comment on media that, like, say, Discovery Channel, Science Channel, Nat Geo, History Channel, or even your local media, local newspapers, local TV stations, radio. You can basically get in touch with people now and say, I would like more science programming. And if you have a particular topic that interests you, this is where you get the sciences and the humanities really blending well. Go to a library, ask a librarian. Oh my goodness, librarians are such underutilized resources in our society. And I mean, right now, if I wanted to, I have a network of scientists, but say I wanted to find books on, I was seeing ads for that movie Judas and the Black Messiah, and Fred Hampton and his assassination. I don't know a lot about that. It's not something that's covered very well in history. I would go to my local library and ask a librarian, what do you have in stock here that I can access about Fred Hampton? I would like to learn. And they are going to have an answer. And I guarantee you, if they don't have it in stock, they'll get it through you for interlibrary loan. So there is so much information that if you don't know where to start, the library is the easiest and best choice because it's free. And librarians love it when you ask them good questions. So do bug your librarian. They will actually thank you.
I was shocked and dismayed at how little I knew about the Fred Hampton story until I saw Judas and the Black Messiah.
Yeah.
But now here's an unfair question I want to follow up on your last answer. Say you're on Facebook, which obviously all of us are, even though we all hate Facebook, and you notice that your a relative is posting something that says, I'm not going to get the COVID vaccine because it's going to put a chip in my arm and Bill Gates is going to be able to track me. How do you address that diplomatically? Do you just walk away, or what are you thinking about that?
Well, I'm in a little bit of an unusual situation in that everybody in my family knows I'm a scientist. So the folks who are on the conspiracy theory end of the spectrum is probably the best way to put it. I don't go at it with, hey, I'm a scientist, listen to me. That's not going to work. There's two ways you can go about it. Now, if you've got time and you have a lot of patience, you can say, why do you think that? Did you yourself have had other vaccines? Yes. I mean, tetanus, measles, mumps, rubella, these are vaccines throughout childhood. What about this vaccine makes it different? Why would you think this vaccine is more likely to, say, track you when you already have a cell phone that knows where you are? You can go down that route and just ask questions. You never have to make a point. You just ask questions. That's it. And that's a gradual sort of change. And it's one that you have to be engaged in. You have to be willing to sit there and just ask questions and not necessarily expect them to change their mind, but just let the light in a little bit. And then the other tactic that you can take, which is one that I tend to do when I'm short on time, which is frequently, I will just post a picture of myself vaccinated and say, so happy I got the vaccine. I feel so relieved. I'm not worried anymore. I just that. You can make a very strong personal statement to loved ones in your life in any aspect of life. Like if you just you have somebody come over to your house who's not into environmental causes, and you say, hey, check out my Chevy Volt because it's an electric car. Or yeah, I recycle. It's really easy. All I do is, rinse this out, put it in the recycling can. Or yeah, you know what? I like to walk down to the store near my house just to, once a week, just to save on gas. I don't want to pollute any more than I have to. You can just make little offhanded comments like that and basically be an example. And then of course, for young people are so much more willing to listen to someone who's older, as long as you can say, oh, I know you may have seen that on TikTok. However, let me show you what the Centers for Disease Control say, or what, this doctor who is, also on TikTok has to say. So it's partially steering people to reliable sources. And if they don't trust any official sources, rely on the fact that they trust you, at least in some way. And then there are some people that you cannot change their mind. And there is a certain point where you have to just stop and say, you know what, I'm not going to win this one. But what I am going to do is go out and try to make a difference in my larger community.
Okay. Well, I have a couple of questions I want to get to, but I want to make sure we have enough time at the end of the hour for questions from the audience. And I also want to be sure that you get a chance to show the photos that I urge you to kind of queue up. I do want to talk a little bit about your Discovery Channel experience, the first Discovery Channel experience that you write about in the book. I want to ask kind of the difficulties about making science accessible to a general audience, and also the balance that you tried to hit, and not always successfully in this first experience, between making something that's true to science but also is entertaining. What have you learned since that first experience with your friends at the Discovery Channel? And what was your reaction when you saw that first show?
Oh my gosh. Well, the first show was basically an unmitigated disaster. And if anybody really wants to go and see it, I urge you, don't believe anything that you don't see come out of my mouth or the other scientists, because they will edit, like you'll turn your face and then they will edit. Like right now, they could say, Chihuahuas are the best dogs. They take that out of context from something else and then make it sound like I said that, when I'm climbing a rock wall or something. So even just the promos, in one of the promos, they did that exact thing to me where I'm climbing this wall, and they had given me a list of phrases they needed me to just record. And they said, oh, everyone's recording the same phrases. And they were like, Jeff, Sean, over here, just very basic things. And then one of them was, I don't think I can do this. And I went, I never say that. Like, where would you put that in? Oh, we're just making everybody say it. And I just trusted them because I didn't know. And then in one of the promos, they had me climbing a rock wall. You can't see my face. And then the voiceover is, I don't think I can do this. And I got so mad. I mean, because anyone who knows me is like, yeah, Jess would never say that. I was watching it. My friend and I were watching a different show, and they promoted that show. And she like shrieked. She said, you would never say that. And I was like, I know I didn't say that. So that was due to the higher ups at Discovery not understanding science. And they have changed personnel since then. So my experience was pretty awful, but then I did recognize the value of going on TV, which is not something that I ever dreamed I would do when I was younger. And I'm happy to say that since then, I've had a lot of really great experiences working with Science Channel, with the Weather Channel, Travel Channel. And I actually have a new Discovery series that I'm co-hosting coming out. I think it's in late May or early June. They haven't given me an air date yet, but this one is actually, it's called Hunting Atlantis. And at first I went, Atlantis, like that's pseudoscience. It's just ridiculous. But then they said, no, you're going to be with a historian who is a good friend of mine now. And he's the Atlantis lover. Your job as the scientist is to try to poke holes in his hypothesis. And I went, oh, fantastic. And so it's actually much different. It's much less like, let's talk about, duck hunters in the swamps or something like they Discovery used to. And I think it's because they had a management change. They had a lot of executives transition out of the company and new people in. And I told them, I said, I'm not doing this unless you respect when I tell you something is the way it is because science says so. Don't argue with me. I'm just the messenger. And they actually understood that. And so it was with Morgan Freeman's production company, Revelations Entertainment. They're the ones who actually put the production together. And they were much more respectful, and we got to do some incredible stuff. So I think there are ways. Of course, I want a volcano show. I want to be able to go show the world volcanoes and be funny and also serious, because that's really what field science is. You have to have a sense of humor, and so someday we'll get there. But for now, Atlantis will definitely get eyeballs on the screen. So I think it's a good opportunity to introduce people to sinkholes and tsunamis and earthquakes and floods and volcanic eruptions, and that is what we show on this program. And of course, cool archaeology. And like, we actually got to have access to the oldest worked gold on planet Earth. It is incredibly well done. So some of this stuff is just so cool. And like I said, I was skeptical because of my past experience, but I know that it's so critical that we as scientists do share what we do with the world. And you never know who's watching. So that's why, you know, when I get emails from people saying like, my 7-year-old daughter thinks you're the coolest thing on the planet, I'm like, okay, all right, that's a lot to live up to. But at the same time, I'm like, you know what, if I had had female scientists saying like, hey, you can do this, this is out here for you to discover, it probably would have got me on the path a little bit sooner.
A couple more questions, and then I want you to have a chance to show those photographs. That show, Atlantis, airs, don't have an air date yet, later this year?
No, late May, early June, and it'll be Discovery and online on Discovery Plus. But yeah, Hunting Atlantis. So make a note. I'm sure you'll see tons of promos before it airs. You know how they go crazy with the commercials.
So Misadventure ends with your decision to run for Congress, and it looks like that race maybe could have gone better. What did you learn? And what needs to happen to put more scientists in policy making and positions?
Well, you know, so I'm really happy with the way that sorry, my dog's trying to come up here for pets. So I'm just going to pet him off screen. Titan, it's dinner time and I haven't fed him. So he's like going to kill me. So anyway, with this race, I was actually able to base my platform and my policy positions on evidence and data and facts. And I didn't yield on that. I refused to play the political games. I wouldn't just promise, yes, I would agree lockstep with whatever party leadership told me. And it wasn't super popular with party leadership. So that makes sense. I was kind of expecting it, but I made a decision that I needed to stand on my principles. And if you know anything about the race and who I was running against, you'll see that it was a giant mess. And of course, I've heard from a lot of people in that area who said, yeah, we shouldn't have just based our votes on who had the most money at the time. We should have actually looked at the job you do. And I said, yeah, okay. And so of course, a lot of people wanted me to run again. And I said, look, I can help more right now because we flipped the House. That was the goal in 2018, was to take back the House and for the Democratic Party. And I'm not saying that all Democrats are inherently better than Republicans or independents. That's not the case. It's just that the Democratic Party platform today aligns more closely with what evidence shows us we need to have a better world. So in this instance, you know, I said, look, I was running because of the threat to science and the environment and our nation's security that we had with Trump in office. And so since we don't have Trump in office now, I don't need to run again. Like, if you have a figure like him, someone who's so anti-science, someone who's going to slash protections for the environment and for workers' rights and for the most vulnerable people in society, that's what would inspire me to run again. And I honestly don't ever want to get to that point. So I think, you know, to get more scientists in office, they just have to run. Same with more janitors, more school teachers. You know, you need people to step up and say, yeah, I want to do this, which is really hard because to run for Congress in particular, it's a full-time job. So you either have to have a second income from a spouse or a partner, or you have to be independently wealthy, or you basically don't care about feeding your family for a year and a half. Like, that's how long I ran. So, you know, it's pretty tough to run for Congress, and we need to make that better. I think publicly funded elections and campaign finance reform would go a long way.
On a weird footnote, of course, Katie Hill ended up winning that 2018 race, flipping the seat to Democratic control. Then she had problems of her own, of course, and now the seat flipped back to a Republican just barely in 2020.
Yeah, it's it was a lot of hard work that basically went to waste at this point.
Well, talk a little bit now about Operation Blueprint Earth. I mean, just Blueprint Earth, and what you're trying to accomplish there. And then let's show those photos. So maybe you can walk us through a little slideshow, and then whatever time we have left, we can give up to the questions from the audience.
Sure. So Blueprint Earth, it's something that I started after I basically had worked in academia. I worked in industry. So I actually worked in mining, coal mining of all things, in the Australian outback. And I recognized that we still need the products that we mine. Obviously coal less than some others, but if you want to be using a computer or a cell phone or a car these days, you need the elements that we can't yet synthesize. We have to extract them from the planet. So I thought, well, there's a better way to do this. And the approach that industry has of really standardizing everything in a very systematic way can be blended with the academic approach of, what's the big picture? Why are we saving the coral reef? Or, why are we talking about deforestation? You can look at those things, marry the two, and create blueprints of functioning environments across disciplines. So it can't just be geologists or biologists, or let's say even more specialized microbiologists and then mammal biologists. Like, you can't break it down that way. You have to get everybody talking to each other. So Blueprint Earth, we're looking at each of Earth's major biomes. There are 7 major ones. Of course, there's tons of small ones, but they're, desert, tundra, grasslands, ecosystems that we learn about when we're kids. And so we started with the desert out here in the Mojave Desert in California. And we've been out there since we started. Our first expedition was 2014. And we obviously had a hiatus due to COVID, but, we have taken over 350 students who are, college aged, college or grad school. They come out with us and they work with more senior scientists, and they work across disciplines. So you'll get, a biologist working with an atmospheric scientist, and they talk to each other. They see what the other scientists are making observations about, what they're measuring, what they're photographing. And then we're actually in the phase right now where we're integrating the data. We're doing pretty intense data analysis, because at this point we have over 6,000, I think we may be over 7,000 unique observations with photos, with measurements, with notes, and we're trying to create a blueprint. So if we have an environment that's damaged, that we can restore it. So like, let's say the best example is if you ever Google the island that is home to Haiti and the Dominican Republic, that island right on the border between the two countries, the Dominican Republic is green and lush and verdant. Haiti is basically deforested. So you could blueprint a healthy environment and restore a damaged one. Or before a mining project, they could blueprint the environment at the time. And then when they're done extracting the resource, they can do a much better, more accurate job of putting things back together. And someday we can use this to go to other planets and sustain human life while we explore elsewhere. We can basically do terraforming if we know the components that are best going to work together to support that life.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at the photographs. I should explain that I asked Jess to bring some photos along, because about the only thing that bugged me about the book is that when you read it, she's always describing these scenes where she's taking these fabulous photographs, none of which actually made it into the book. Yeah, so I'm kind of curious to see some of these scenes.
It's a bit of a bummer, because they were going to put photos in, and then they said, oh, never mind, we're not going to put them in. I went, okay. But actually, okay, let me go to the share screen thingy. Oh, it says I've been disabled. I don't know if the folks at Grassroots can do that.
I hope the people at Grassroots can do that. But while we're waiting for that, let me ask you.
We should let you know.
Oh, okay, let me see. Oh, yes, I got it. Okay, here we are. So if you could give me a thumbs up if you could see that, Mike.
Oh, yeah, we got it.
Yeah, okay. So just a couple pictures. So don't think you're going to have to listen to a presentation. It's nothing like that. But this is from the book. I tried to just grab a few that I had around and handy access to. This is me in the volcanic vent on the summit of Mauna Loa. And you can see, this was my first day ever working on a volcano. And I am just utterly thrilled. And beneath me, we actually have no idea how deep that vent goes down, because that was a source for the lava that erupted in Hawaii in 1984 on Mauna Loa. And for a sense of scale over here, that was me when I was actually looking at the mineral composition of the lava. But you can see Mauna Loa's summit caldera in the background. And this is an area where lava came up from underground. And this is about 14,000 feet elevation too. So we're pretty high up and we don't know how far down that vent actually goes. And of course, the first thing my mom said when she saw the picture was, "Where's your safety harness?" And I went, eh. I was like, "No, it was fine. The other scientists said it was fine."
That's still not a good answer for your mom, though.
I know, right? I think after reading the book, she was like, "I'm glad I found out about all of the details after the fact." So then this is a scene from the book. This is on the Inapo Trail when Frank Truesdell and David, the other volunteer who's on the left of the screen, we were doing a kinematic GPS survey down the side of Mauna Loa, the world's largest volcano. And I think I described Frank's outfit in there in pretty good detail. So he definitely has a look in the field, and a lot of us scientists do. We can be fairly eccentric. So, but you can see how low the visibility was. I mean, it was so poor. We basically were walking blind by the end of the survey. And so this is Frank in the lava tube where we camped out that night. And as I mentioned in the book, don't go into lava tubes unless it's one that is open to the public, if you ever find one, because it is where, in Hawaii at the very least, where the indigenous people back in the day used to bury their dead, because the island is entirely volcanic. So you could be stumbling into somebody's burial site, and you don't want to do that. But since Frank is part Native Hawaiian, he said, "It's fine. I cleared it with the ancestors. Get in."
Did he have the paperwork to prove it?
Yes, I'm sure he does if you ask him. And then, of course, this is what this is. It's a little blurry again. Bear in mind, this is 2008, so cameras were not as good as they are now. But this is me doing something very scientific. I promised my friends that if I saw flowing lava, I would poke it with a stick, and I did. And predictably, the stick that I'm holding caught on fire. So I had to throw it into the river of lava that is burning through that forest. So, yep. So that's what it looks like when you poke things with a stick for science. And this is actually the chapter that I just read the excerpt from. This is sampling flowing lava. And that's what it looks like when you basically pick off a blob from a pahoehoe flow toe. And you can see how the gloves, the heat resistant gloves, are super silver. Got the balaclava on. I'm shielding my face. And you see how the lava is pulling away like taffy from hell. What you can't see is the coffee can full of basically room temperature water behind me that I'm about to turn and put the lava bleb into. But I can't even convey how hot it is in that photo. I will never forget it, because it's a whole body experience. And you can see the broken fragments of lava beneath that newest flow, the little like pieces, and they're very glassy. All lava tends to have a good amount of silica. This kind of lava, basalt lava, is a little bit more iron and manganese rich, which gives it that dark color, but it also does have a good amount of silica in it. And so it makes a glassy sound when you break it. And this is just, taking helicopters, which is my favorite way to get around a volcano. Flight suits aren't exactly the most stylish, but they call this at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, this is the hero pose. Every researcher has to get a shot looking cool in front of the helicopter on the world's largest volcano. So there you go. And it's the best way to get, you can see the environment. It's not exactly a friendly, welcoming place. So you need an easy way to get in and out. And this is something I don't advise doing. I was waiting for the helicopter and I said, I wonder what it's like to make a lava angel. It's not comfortable. Stick with snow angels is the long and short of it. And then this is the chapter when I'm off the shore of Hawaii. This is on the research cruise. And I don't have any really great shots of Jason, the submersible, but you can Google those. There's plenty of those. But that is my supervisor, Mark, pulling out a chunk of lava that the robot had picked up for us off the ocean floor, 5,000 meters below where we were. So like 15,000 feet below us. And I was helping him. This was happening at like 2 a.m. because everything in, ship time is weird. And then on the right, that's me cleaning off the samples in the nitrogen atmosphere of the glove box. And those gloves, you can see they're huge. Like, they're just way too big. But that's because, there you go, everything in science is sized for guys. So it's like, okay, no one thought to bring smaller gloves. Fine. So I bring my own gloves for things now, but you learn, you live and you learn. And then this was, I didn't have anything from Peru handy, but this was El Reventador. This was for the Discovery Channel. And, you know, you can see I'm on the left, and then Sean Kylan, who is he's a Navy SEAL. He was the guy they brought along because clearly scientists don't know how to act in the field. We don't know what to do. We're just helpless. But he was great. He was a wonderful person to work with. And then on the right, crouched around that box, is Jeff Johnson, who is a volcano geophysicist at Boise State over in Idaho. And he is fantastic. He actually studies the sounds volcanoes make below the range of human hearing. So it's pretty fascinating stuff. And then the main thing I love about this picture is, I mean, we are 2 miles as the crow flies from that eruption. The volcano's erupting every 30 minutes. And, you know, we're just doing what we need to do. And the camera guy's still like, oh my God, because that does actually happen. It's really hard to be near something that's erupting so beautifully every 30 minutes and not just freak out and jump up and down and scream in joy every time, because there is nothing as powerful as feeling that eruption, feeling it rattle in your chest and watching the plume go up. I mean, it's incredible. So the eruption columns are spectacular, and you can see them convecting as they go up, which is really cool because it looks like a mini tornado in a way, but like a slower tornado. So very neat. And then, of course, Explorers Club, that's the flag. Carlos is my husband on the right, and he's my co-founder at Blueprint Earth. And we've carried the flag with us into on an expedition in the Mojave. And lastly, this is me running for Congress on the left. That was at one of the Explorers Club annual dinners. They have a fantastic photographer who takes portraits there. And after he shot me, he went and shot a bunch of Apollo astronauts, which was pretty cool. And then on the right, that is actually from when I was at the dinner right before I ran. And this is the very ending of the book, where the fearless girl statue facing down the charging bull there on Wall Street. And that's when I stood behind it and was like, all right, we're doing this with the mohawk. You know, I've got my hair up in the mohawk, and I still do have, my hair is still shaved on the side. So I can do a mohawk when I want. But those were the pictures.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Yeah, there we go.
Hey, Courtney, do we have questions?
Hi, yes, we do. I just want to say, Jess, this has been such a fascinating conversation. I just want to like follow you along on all your journeys and just like watch everything. We do have a question. We have going back to when we were talking about science literacy. What countries do you know are more science literate?
I would say a lot of the Scandinavian countries. I mean, they're very good at teaching people from a young age about science. And then oftentimes, you know, Germany in the past has been pretty good. I'm not exactly sure if they still are. But I mean, look, they've elected Angela Merkel, and she is somebody who is, she's a scientist, and that was her first career. And then Japan is very big on science literacy. Same with South Korea. And so I think, you know, even it's starting to become more of a trend in a lot of the Latin American countries where I've worked too. They've started to see that investing in science and teaching students about this is how they're going to have the jobs of the future. So really, if you want to know, look at where green technology is really starting to take off. That's where you can kind of see that, oh, they're emphasizing this in the schools and in the messaging to the public, saying, hey, it's important that you understand how climate change works. So.
Awesome. And then we have one more question if you have time. I know it's
sure.
The last question is, do you think if we encouraged more scientists to write biographies and memoirs, there would be a closed gap in science literature or science?
I hope so. I think that the real challenge is that a lot of scientists have never been taught how to communicate with the public. And I have an advantage because I was forced, along with everyone in my high school, to take a speech class, freshman speech and debate. And I was terrified of public speaking. I was a complete introvert, although you'd never guess it now. But this really forced me to basically understand a topic after some basic research and then be able to explain it to people. And if you want to like improve your speaking at home, you can basically give yourself a topic, half an hour, prepare, and then give a 5 to 7 minute talk. Basically write it like an essay, have a thesis, support it with evidence, and then with the subsequent points that you make, and then sum it up. And that is, if we had scientists doing that, whether it's through memoir, whether it's through podcasting or going on TV or hosting public talks, you're going to see an interest. You will see people saying, yeah, tell me more, because we are born as explorers and scientists and with this innate curiosity to test the world around us. I mean, we all do that. So it's just reminding people that it's not only okay to be curious, but we encourage it, and we want that. We want an educated public that keeps asking the important questions that are going to help us solve big picture problems in the decades ahead.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you both, Mike and Jess, for doing this book talk with Grassroots. We've had such a great time. This has been such a great conversation. It will be live on our YouTube if you want to use it for anything.
Yay.
We just really appreciate having you, Jess. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Courtney. And thanks so much, Mike. Great questions. I loved it. I could talk to you for hours.
We could go on and on.
All right. And I just will encourage everyone in the audience that Jess's book is available for purchase, both in our storefront. There's the book. Thank you, Mike. And Jess, it's available in our storefront or with us online. So we encourage you to buy that book to support Jess and Grassroots. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Bye.